Hi, I'm Wayne Parker. I'm a research scientist with the Department of Primary Industries Regional Development and I'm based in Geraldton. Thanks for having me along this afternoon. Today I'm going to be talking about water because really that's what it's all about. Whether it's deep ripping, it's moldboarding or it's spading or whatever it happens to be, it's about water. Now if you're digging a hole at the end of harvest and you're finding water somewhere through the profile, it means that you've got a constraint. Your roots aren't getting to it and you're leaving money in the paddock basically because you're not using that water. So you've probably heard the quote, "Dad, I've dug a hole. It's filling with water." No, for those of you who haven't heard that quote, ask an older generation in the room and get them to put you onto it. This is what we want to avoid, and deep ripping is one of those options for managing constraints so that you do have more access to water and moisture. But first things first, you need to understand what constraint you're dealing with. Now the majority of our soils, unfortunately, are susceptible to compaction, high soil strengths, and in the region that you guys are based, and I'm focused here on the Jerramungup and the Lake King areas, you're also constrained by soil strength at depth because you've got duplex soils, sand over clay, and these particular soils prove a real challenge when it comes to deep ripping. If we want to deep rip those soils, there's a couple of things that we really need to understand, and that is first the depth to clay, and second, what's the clay made up of. We aren't going to see responses in all our soil types, irrespective of what they are in those areas, if we have toxicities at depth. The toxicities I'm referring to, particularly in those particular duplexes, are often sodicity, sometimes boron, high pH, and these sorts of things. Problem with sodicity and putting a deep ripper into a clay that is sodic, often means it's dispersive, and what happens is a ripper tine will go through and bust that up, only to have it disperse, settle, and be rock hard again. Now I'm hoping that Glenn is able to touch on some of these topics today when he talks to you, and in particular he might bring up reference to a trial of mine that I've been conducting with the Chambers family at Ravensthorpe, just south of Mount Madden, where we've run deep ripping strips of varying widths, or varying tine widths, through the paddock of highly variable soil. In the top we have a shallow sand over clay, and the clay is not as toxic. In the bottom of the valley we have a clay that is deeper, up to 60 centimetres below the surface, so we've got 60 centimetres of sand on top, and it is highly dispersive and very toxic. When we ran a ripper through that 2 years ago, we saw an overall benefit from ripping in that trial. However, some of the issues that we had include the cloddiness, which you'll hear spoken about with Bindy's bloopers discussion, and as well as some of that establishment around a soft soil or a cloddy soil, which did impact on the final yields. So really, in summing up, I'm keen for you to understand is that, yep, there is potential for deep ripping to have a positive impact in your area. However, before we go ahead holus bolus, we need to understand the soil at depth, how deep our sand is, what that clay is made up of, before we go ahead and put a deep ripper into it. What's also valuable is to understand the likelihood that we're going to get a response because as we get into the lower rainfall, more difficult farming areas, the likelihood of a response from deep ripping just does decline, and so it's possible that deep ripping may not have a fit in some of the areas that you guys farm. Anyhow, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for having me in this little presentation. If you've got any questions, if that Tom or Glenn can't answer, please give me a call. I look forward to catching up with you soon.